So actually, there are two groups. That one is on the screen, and here remaining the microphone.
스크린이 이걸로 바.
There. So now the camera is off.
Okay, if I may ask everyone to please take your seats. I know that many of you haven't registered yet, but there was a long wait, and we have our keynote speaker, and I didn't want anybody to have to miss the keynote. So hopefully we'll do the keynote first, and then you'll be able to register during the coffee break. And get your coffee too. So I know it's a little confusing. All right, so let me welcome you on behalf of the entire organizing committee of FACT 2022 to Seoul. 서울에 오신 것을 환영합니다. I know that many of you are participating online, so probably watching me on Hopin. And for those of you who had wanted to come but couldn't for various reasons, I am very sorry that you couldn't come. These times are very difficult for all of us. And those of you who did make it to Seoul, I sincerely welcome you, and I thank you for making this difficult trip. I know that international travel is still very difficult, and you've gone through all the trouble getting your PCR test, getting all whatever to get here. And we are all very glad to be finally meeting in person. So I hope that you can make the best out of this conference for the next 4 days. I have just a few announcements. So for those of you who registered really early, the early birds, we have the pronoun stickers, but we didn't have them when you first registered. So we have them back there at the registration desk. If you would like to get a pronoun sticker and put it on your badge, please do so. Also during the break, the desk is going to be very busy, maybe later on in the day. We do have a prayer room, nursing room, and gender neutral bathroom. The prayer and nursing room are on this side. The gender neutral bathroom is on that side. So they are marked, so please do look for them. And if you have questions, please ask me or the volunteers. We have lunch provided for all 4 days, and they are, if you look in your badge, there are tickets for lunch. We do have the vegan option for those of you who would like to choose that option. And then for the PCR test, so for those of you who didn't get a PCR test at the airport, we have student volunteers and a small bus taking you to a local clinic to get your PCR test, which you're supposed to get within 72 hours of arrival. So if you would like that, please let them know at the registration desk, and you can sign up for a slot like today or tomorrow or etc. And so all of this is not going to be possible without a crew of student volunteers, and our local student volunteers are always going to be at the registration desk, or at least there will at least be one local volunteer at the registration desk. So if you have any questions about anything local, where how to get on the subway, etc., please do ask the student volunteers. And I thank them again on behalf of everyone here, all of the participants, for their very, very hard work. And lastly, before we move on to the keynote speaker, we do have these sponsors: DeepMind, Sony AI, Microsoft, Naver, LG AI Research, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Twitter, Luminate, and Amazon. So we thank the sponsors for making this conference possible. And so now, without further ado, let me introduce the first keynote speaker. It's very heartwarming for me because she's a dear colleague of mine as well. So we have Professor Meeyoung from KAIST. Oh, and I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the local general chair. I'm Alice Oh at KAIST also. So our keynote speaker, who's also from KAIST, is going to speak to us about the future of news on social platforms. And Meeyoung is a chief investigator in the data science group at the IBS Pioneer Research Center for Mathematical and Computational Sciences, and an associate professor at KAIST School of Computing. Dr. Cha's research is on data science and information science, with an emphasis on modeling socially relevant information propagation processes. Her work on misinformation, poverty mapping, fraud detection, and long-tailed content has gained more than 14,000 citations and received the Best Paper Awards at several conferences. Dr. Cha has served as a program co-chair for ICWSM 2015 and Big Event at WWW 2020, and currently is on the editorial board of PeerJ and ACM Transactions and Social Computing. In 2015 and 16, Dr. Cha worked at Facebook's data science team as a visiting professor. She is the recipient of the Korean Young Information Scientist Award in 2019 and the AAAI ICWSM Test of Time Award in 2020. So let's welcome Meeyoung with a big round of applause.
Okay, thank you, Alice. You screen share again. Oh, okay. So hi, everyone. So welcome to FACT, and I'm super honored to be the first keynote speaker for the conference. And this is like the first conference since COVID. It's like the offline conference, and I'm super happy to just see so many people today. So today I want to talk about the future of news on social platforms, and I will try to tie in what our research group have been doing, what the recent trends have been, and hopefully you can get some insight from my talk. So I want to start with what has been changing, like what we all agree on. I want to just look back on what's happening. And I think when it comes to changing dynamics in news media landscape, the first thing is now everybody's mostly watching news through the small screen. And when that medium changes, there's a lot of things that changes. So there are studies that are now saying people consume news in a completely different way. The order of news that we get to see are no longer determined by editors, but they're determined by ranking algorithms, and they're not necessarily reflective of the journalistic conventions. And also, a lot of studies point out people consume news in a very brief manner. So we look at the headline, we look at the picture, we look at the blurb, and we don't necessarily click and go in to read the full news articles, but people do want to read the news comments. So oftentimes there are some anecdotal evidences that are saying people read comments more, sometimes more than the news story itself, spending more time on the comments. And comments are not written by any editors. So all of these things change the way we encounter news. And also news ranking have been based on engagement metrics. So what does engagement metrics mean? How much time you spend on each news item. For example, if you are scrolling down and you kind of pause maybe 250 milliseconds, that information, even if you don't click anything, will be logged at the system as you had been interested in the content. So anything 250 milliseconds, usually industry platforms will log that information and reflect that in your ranking. And what happens is we are going to pause and we're going to look at items, news stories that are sometimes surprising, but not necessarily because these are amazing stories that we would continue to want to read, but they're surprising and they grab our attention. As a result, algorithms cannot distinguish what we really want to read or what is really important to show versus what we happen to be just spending extra more time on. And that leads to sometimes increasing clickbaits and fake news. So there have been also some reports that say when it comes to certain events, the top 10 news were actually fake news rather than true news. But now we are recognizing these differences between engagement-based metrics and what people really want, what would promote social well-being. And there are many initiative, really amazing initiatives from different schools, different platforms, organizations that try to value human value rather than just increasing revenue. And one example is, this is a great article by Jonathan Stray at Berkeley Chai. I would recommend everyone to take a look at it. So how do we reflect? So these algorithms do not know what is a good social value, but platforms are not responsible for reflecting maybe journalistic conventions. They're not news media. So how do we do that? So one idea might be to actually ask users. So after showing users, maybe there could be some random sampling. Do you want to see more of content X? Do you want to see less of this? Or how did you feel about these news? And maybe probing small fraction of people, but not to the point that we feel abused by all these survey questions, but maybe a small set of questions might guide this algorithm learn more what is important, what is less important. And maybe something like that might be facilitated because now there are heavy regulations starting to be in place. For example, in Europe, there's something called the Digital Services Act. So if platforms would show very personally identifiable, information and use that to advertise, show hate speech or any content that is not promoting like well-being of users, the platforms may be subject to a huge fine. And any platforms, now all platforms are really global. You cannot just serve on countries that do not have any European, users. So maybe this kind of trend, heavy regulations, will also spread to many different places in the world. So here is what I envision. So maybe the future of news could be something that we could have all of these objectives, the goals of the news media platforms, the news outlets, and users co-align. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean that we should just show op-eds or we should just show social news. But as long as there's retention, meaning that users would also find it interesting, want to come back, and there's also enough revenue within that boundary, we could try to make a little bit of adjustment so that we promote the values that are listed right here. Social well-being, information veracity, algorithmic journalism, human-centered AI, fairness, privacy, accountability, transparency, interpretable models. So after I wrote this, I realized, okay, really this conference is about all of these topics. So I'm hoping that maybe after my talk, I could talk with many of you who are interested in these topics. And in my talk today, I want to touch upon 3 of these topics very briefly. And they're going to be social well-being, information veracity, and accountability. Okay, so I want to start with fake news, information veracity, because that's what I'm really interested in. So there have been tremendous amount of work on fake news detection, or observation studies of fake news and fact checking. And I want to recap on what we have learned from many of these research. So finding number 1 is that rumors have very specific time, space traits. So in the figure on the left bottom from my own study showing one spreading pattern of a single rumor and spreading pattern of a single fact information. And now like the nodes will represent users and the links mean they're either retweeted or mentioned. So rumors or fake misinformation can spread as large as true information. That's what the science study has revealed. In fact, the top rumors spread even faster than the same, the top fact news stories. And what happens is they have very different shapes. It's because they propagate through different set of users. Often fact information goes from high degree to low degree user, just like the two-step of flow information theory. But rumors often start from lower degree and they're later on picked up by high degree users, and high degree users are less likely to mention about them even after they hear it, because they don't want to lose their credibility. So propagation shapes are different, and that means if we learn these traits, we can use it in detection. But there's a flaw. There's a study by also Ellis's group that says there's a golden time, and one can also spot this golden time based on how the patterns of user participation. But oftentimes when algorithms try to detect the rumors, it's already late because the harm has been done. You need to learn these patterns. Second insight I want to bring is from this beautiful study done by Facebook Data Science Group, published at ICWS in 2014. So this figure is showing propagation pattern of a misinformation, a single misinformation, and when page is shared, there's a link. And you can see there are blue nodes and red nodes. Blue nodes are users who just share, and red nodes are when there's a comment on that post saying this is fake news. It had been, fact-checked at link X, so it's debunked. What you realize is when there's a red node, meaning somebody says in the comment this is fake, people stop sharing. But because there are so many branches, it continues to spread. So that means just putting some information out there and saying this is false in a fact-checking site is not enough. We need to be repeatedly tagging this, and this is a very mundane and very, very challenging task. So beyond this, we had learned so many insights from all the papers that have been published in the field. And then during COVID-19, we had the case that we could really test some of these theories. So here are some rumors that I think you could find in most of the places in Asia, Africa, in North America. So in Korea, one of the popular rumors were drinking strong alcohol will kill the virus. Even postdoc members in my group were telling me what kind of drinks might work better than the others, and add some lemon inside, and that will help even better. And this one, the second one, hot air dryer can kill the virus. My father, who was a physicist and he's really into facts, he told me that we should start drying our mask after we use it, and that will actually ruin the mask. So there are lots of rumors that we heard, and these rumors were translated in many different languages. But there are, of course, some rumors that are only spreading in a local region. Some of my favorites are fireworks will kill the coronavirus in the air. Eating 9 eggs a day can prevent the infection. My parents had eaten so many eggs during COVID-19. I think it's healthy, but the rumor says it has to be 9 eggs. So this is what happened. At the beginning of COVID-19, China suffered, Korea suffered, some from Asian countries suffered. But when we heard these rumors about the hot air dryer and all these rumors, I checked with my colleagues in China, and they have told me, oh, that rumor had already been fact-checked in China. Why is it spreading in Korea? And then maybe a few weeks later, I got to see them translated in English. Maybe they were independently spreading because we all think about similar things. We don't know why. But I saw that just like the virus, the rumors were propagating in different language, changing, spreading from one country to another. And what was also striking was because there was a time gap between how the virus spread, Korea was in complete lockdown, China was in complete lockdown, but the rest of the world were not in lockdown mode. And there were ample time that we thought we could do something about these rumors. And, these rumors don't look that harmful, but when the the alcohol rumor spread to Iran, it's estimated that it cost lives of more than 1,000 people because alcohol is forbidden in the country, and there would be, methanol, mixed alcohol that would spread in the market, and it led to many people becoming blind, some children becoming blind, and many people losing their lives. So this is when we thought, okay, maybe just by trying to fix these rumors or trying to stop these rumors, we're not, virologists, we cannot produce vaccines, but we can at least contribute a little bit. So that's what made us start this campaign called the Facts Before Rumors. And this started in March of 2020. So it's pretty early on. And we collected Twitter and Weibo, social media webs, and we collected 200 prominent rumors that are not region bound and that are really health related. And we pruned them down to 20 items that have been completely fact checked by Chinese or Korean CDC. And we have the fact checks for them. So we collected 20 misinformation and we post them online and we ask for help. Can you please translate these into your own languages? We put up a Google spreadsheet, and so many people came and they started translating these in their own languages. So at the end, our campaign was translated in more than 20 languages. It was ultimately 21 languages. We provided a background infographic, so it fits really nicely on the phone. It looks beautiful, like a little poster. And we spread the messages online, and it spread to 50,000 people in 151 countries. It spread to more than to these people, but these were the people who responded that they actually saw to the end of the campaign. So here are some examples. So we only provided the background image, and these were translations done by people, and it was all done by crowdsourcing because one person would come and the next person would fix it, make it a little shorter, and we had to just trust Google Translation to make sure that the translation was okay. And we really wanted to have the local language because who are the people who are going to be understanding English in many different countries? Even in Korea, it's going to be very, small set of people who are going to read English post. So what happened? So now that we have spread these campaigns, and it started as kind of like, our desperate way to do something during lockdown. We couldn't do anything. And because it spread so much, and at the end of the campaign, we asked people to respond to some questions. Some people did respond, some people didn't respond, but these were based on 50,000 people who responded. And because we had so many countries, we could observe the data. It didn't start as a research project, but we could actually do some research on it. So here is a graph that shows on the right-hand side, countries sorted by GDP per capita. So left-hand side is a poor country, right-hand side is the wealthy country. And the y-axis shows, have you seen these rumors? What is the chance that you have seen these rumors before? So we show the rumor and we show the fact checks. So you immediately see a declining line, meaning that developing countries or the poor countries are at a larger risk of seeing these rumors that are really health concerning. So not only these countries have weak infrastructure to handle virus itself, they have to put extra effort to fight against infodemic. And then we had a lot of testimonials who were sending us like messages and their stories, and like it was really beautiful to see. And this is one doctor from Botswana telling us that it was very good because no other source of fact check information was available to them at the time. And our campaign, which just started in Korea with some colleagues, it reached them. So we were really really honored to serve these people. So we had 20 different fact checks, and they could be categorized into some groups. And there were some really interesting patterns. I'll try to point out a few. So I think you all remember the 5G rumor, and the 5G rumor was really popular in certain places like Africa, North America, Europe, but that rumor did not come to Asia. Maybe because we were already using 5G a lot at the time, or I don't know. But what's really interesting is it spread a lot in Africa, Europe, North America, but the red only means spread. Believably, do you actually believe that rumor? That's the green. It's very small. So the popular news are not necessarily believed, but they are still popular because it's kind of funny. Some people obviously believed it, but so what I want to say is fact checking should not prioritize simply because some rumors are popular. There are more important rumors that needs to be fact checked, and which are something related to vaccines. So the tracking ones, population control. If you get the vaccine, you won't be having children. This is a way to insert microchips into your body to track the population. So that rumors spread so widely in Africa and Europe. And rumors like this have direct implication to vaccine perception. So I think the priority should be not be based on just popularity. And there's another really interesting rumors like gargling and sunbathing. Have you ever heard of sunbathing rumor? You should stand in the sun and get the sun directly to to be more healthy. So people in some countries, I saw on news that people gather together and stand in the sun every day. So that gargling, we heard a lot in Korea. We gargle like a lot, but that gargling news was not really popular in many places. So rumors are really cultural, and exposure does not necessarily mean believability. And what we ultimately wanted to do was we asked this question. We don't have a vaccine yet. This was March of 2020, but if vaccines get developed, are you willing to be vaccinated? And then depending on how people responded to which rumor they have seen, which fact check they have now see, and which rumor they actually believe, we could do a statistical test of the control of that exposure of a rumor or fact check to vaccine perception. And this could be computed by something called marginal effects. So I'm going to try to break down this really complex figure. So whatever on the right-hand side means it's going to be good for vaccines. So people are going to take vaccines. Whatever that comes out on the left-hand side means people will not want to take vaccine because of that particular factor, if everything is controlled. So I'll just point out a few points. So one is that if somebody had been vaccinated for non-required vaccines, the person is more willing to be vaccinated in the future. And that's obvious because you already got the non-required one, so why not? If people have seen a fact check on a false claim, that exposure leads to positively toward vaccine acceptance, which is great. And when people think COVID-19 is a real threat, because there had been some rhetoric that COVID-19 is just flu, it's going to be okay. Now I think it's become like that, right? But at the time, at the initial phase, there should be a step like how population, should behave. And when people do not believe it is a real threat, people were less likely to be vaccinated. And this was our most warning sign. When people not just see the claim, but when they say they actually believe in that rumor, even if they're fact checked, they're still going to remain as, they don't want to be vaccinated. So based on this study, we figured fact checking is really effective. It shifts people's perception, but it's not enough for people who already start to believe in rumors. So there should be something to be done, maybe more proactively. And maybe sending fact checks before could be one solution, but there's tons of challenges like how do you make the fact checks interesting, right? Okay, so that was our own group's research, and I want to talk also about other groups' research. So I stole some slides from some of the events. WHO have been organizing infodemic management conference, and they have a series of that and similar events. And you could see all the talks on YouTube. You could search them, and they're really amazing resources. So WHO has launched something called YEARS project, and it's called Early AI Supported Response with Social Listening, really cute acronym. So it monitors Twitter and many other social platforms across many different countries, like 20, 30 countries, and then it does topic modeling and try to see which topics are trending in which country. So it's like a dashboard that WHO can just look at it. And you can also look at it. It's open for free. And it also shows you which users are influential on what topic. Really, another interesting trend is that UNICEF has launched the Vaccine Demand Observatory. It's kind of like what we do, like in social media. We want to have the observatory for the whole events. And they now have the Vaccine Demand Observatory. And this is not just for COVID-19, but for all of the vaccine-related conversations. And the most interesting part of this is they treat different information really differently. So not all information have equal weights. They categorize which information is okay to ignore. Some information that you just listen with passive response, and very small fraction which needs to have direct response. So having that guideline is really amazing. And if you go to, you can subscribe to the email, you can look at their reports, and they give you updates on which information related to COVID-19 are classified as the red light, yellow light, green light. They also have a DAG similar to YEARS. And CDC has similar mechanism of classifying information. So I think we need to, we get to learn that not all, conversations are very risky, but we don't know which ones are risky, but the policymakers or people in different countries can look into UNICEF or CDC guidelines into what conversation have been flagged as risky and should be handled immediately, by different countries. So I'm going to show you some example of what was risky and what was not risky. So this is one example that says it was a risky information. So this is actually the report. So report number 11. It's published every 2-3 weeks. I'm subscribing to this. It's free to subscribe. You can just find the search and then start subscribing. So here's a tweet. So today I just got exactly this from the report. So it shows some example social media posts, and this particular post says people have been vaccinated, but they still get confirmed, and this kind of news should be immediately handled with responded by how. Show them facts and hire influential users, do something, so actively reach out. Versus conversations about people mentioning vaccination is kind of violating people's rights to freely, decide what to do on their body. This kind of conversation is okay to watch. There's no need to directly respond. But they got to say if it's an orange, like a passive response, at least put it in the FAQ. And if it's a green light, it's okay to do nothing. Okay. So we learned that classification of information is pretty critical, and that's a good strategy that policymakers are taking. And maybe our community can help by trying to classify maybe social media posts into these categories, so which is likely red, which is likely green, so that humans can take less time classifying themselves. So here are some other research that there are tons of papers on COVID-19 patterns. Here are some interesting ones. So this paper published that Nature Human Behavior looks into the pathways of information propagation, and it tries to compute something called the infodemic risk index. It measures what percentage of all conversation about the virus are false. And you can compute this at the individual level because we have the Twitter follow graph, we have the information, so one can compute, and then one can aggregate that information at the city level, country level. So ultimately, it could show in a map which country are more exposed to infodemic versus, not, and whether countries that are exposed have higher rates of infection. Another story I want to introduce is published in Nature 2020. And this paper looks at Facebook groups. It actually looks at a huge amount of information. 100 million individuals page group information. And they classify groups into 3 types. One is groups on Facebook that are directly related to pro-vaccination. These are the blue dots. And groups of Facebook groups, these are related to anti-vax. So the authors use the group names to manually categorize. And the green mean they are not related. They could be on, music or anything else other than vaccine. So what they look at is now the groups have 3 categories, and you have individuals who's belonging to which group, and that information can be used to simulate whether pro-vax groups and the undecided groups will have higher frequency of interaction versus undecided group and anti-vax group. And the sign is really worrying because by 2033, the researchers estimate anti-vax have more connections to pro-vax group, to the undecided group. The pro-vax groups are only talking among themselves, while the anti-vax is trying to reach out to the rest of the world, so that based on their simulation, by 2033, anti-vax will be larger than pro-vax group. And this is the paper in Nature 2020. So the paper makes like amazing amount of insights, and it's more like a policy paper, but backed up by data and simulation and complex network analysis. It's a beautiful paper to read, and this is a very warning sign that we should take a note. Okay, so moving on to another aspect more about social well-being of users. So we also looked at, we try to wanted to see this thing about what emotional impact COVID-19 have on regular people. So did we all become pessimistic, negative after COVID? Because there are a lot of studies that says less positivity, a lot of negative posts on social media. That's immediately after COVID. But what if look at a bit longer term? So in our study, we look at nearly 1.5 years. So we looked at users who were active on Twitter prior to COVID-19, and we grouped them into positive group, neutral group, negative group. So what is your prevailing emotion on Twitter? And after COVID, not immediately after, but maybe 1 year after COVID starts, what is your prevailing emotion then? And this is what we find. So we initially thought a lot of positive people will move to negative people, negativity will grow, but it was not. So classifying about 9 million tweets and classifying these tweets with deep learning-based sentiment analysis, shows that majority of the people stay in their prevailing emotional zone. And if you were a happy person prior to COVID, you somehow find ways to talk positively about COVID. For example, oh, we're so thankful to the medical team, and the vaccines are available, or it's almost toward the end. So you say something positive. If you were negative prior to COVID-19, you find ways to say something negative about COVID-19. So this was our observation. So immediately, of course, it becomes negative, but after some time, like 1 year time, people come back to their normal emotional zone, which we call the emotion bubbles. And we also see really interesting reports that say the chatbot usage has increased during COVID-19, and primarily because a lot of people were under lockdown, couldn't do the offline chat. But people also report that they prefer to talk with virtual humans about difficult situations because it keeps them anonymous. So I think future research could also look into how can we use chatbots for maybe intervention of depressive moods. So let me get into fact-checking a little bit. So far, I've talked about fake news, true news, like really black and white, but a lot of times it's really gray and a little bit of fact, a little bit of truth. And even more times, because the speed of information production is so much faster than how it could be fact-checked, a lot of things will remain undecided. So they're going to be registered in the fact-checking sites, but it will still be like, okay, we're still looking for labels, still people are working on it. So there are different ways that platforms use to notify these borderline messages, but are borderline messages actually perceived as borderline messages? That's the question. So what we did was we asked unproven, still remains to be, unproven questions, and then we ask, what is your thought on it? And we show a hypothetical fact check, and then we ask again and see if people's opinion changes. If we don't show anything, and after some time we ask the same question, people are the same. They respond the same. Their post stance doesn't change from the pre-stance. But if we show, okay, many people are thinking this information is mostly true, then people shift positively after they see the fact checks. And if we show negative fact check, people say, okay, now I'm going to say this is likely false. So fact checking is really effective. And then later on, we, of course, debunked and say, oh, everything was hypothetical. The rumor still remains as a rumor. But when we said it's a mixed evidence, it didn't change. But when we said it's a divided evidence, some fact checkers say it's true, some say it's false, it still was considered as neutral. And there's a theory that says people want to avoid risk. So risk aversion. But when we say a fact-checking label that says it is uncertain, somehow this was perceived negatively by people rather than being neutral. So the way that fact-checking sites adopt these wordings should be done really carefully. And there's another really interesting story says, when is a good time to show fact check? So the study showed fact check immediately before they show the rumor, during the rumor, and immediately after the rumor. And after 1 week, they tested which fact checks people remember more correctly. And the answer was all fact checks were useful. So people got better when they saw, fact checks. But when they saw the fact checks after they have seen the rumor, they were more likely to keep that longer in their memory. So because it becomes more memorable, they've been fooled and then they are corrected. So it's more memorable. But there's also a high cost because you need to make sure that people get to see the fact checks, and then the harm is done. So we don't know about the psychological impact, or this is like doubling the information flow. So there is a cost, but this is more memorable. So I think we need to start thinking about what are we going to do in the next pandemic or the next risk that we suffer globally, and how do we handle, misinformation. Okay, my last piece of information I want to share is about accountability. So who is responsible for online misinformation? And there have been lots of rhetoric on this blame game, and the blame game is usually news media or reporters blaming social media for their faults, for their participation in the spread of misinformation. So Facebook is to blame, Google is to blame, TikTok is to blame, right? So what we did was we asked users, who do you think is responsible for creating, disseminating, and not preventing the spread? So we asked separately. And then we didn't give any options. We asked people to just write freely, and this is what we get. Rather than news media blaming social media, online participants actually put users as most responsible for creating news and disseminating news, but for not preventing, users are still named, but not at the top. But what's really interesting is the way they write this is not like us. It's like the others on social media, the users on social media, but not me kind of stance. And people put news platforms as also participating in creation, dissemination, and not prevention. And people put, really interesting that news media is ranked even higher than social platforms for creating and disseminating. And when we ask about, okay, how do they disseminate? Because they talk about the fake news without the fact checks, thereby they participate in the dissemination. So it was more like unintentional, dissemination. So social media is responsible, but mostly for not preventing the falsehood. And a lot of people also talk about the role of foreign institutions in news misinformation spreading. So at the end, what we collectively say is, I think people recognize it's not just Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, but also it's users, foreign media, it's the policymakers, it's the politicians, news media, everybody who's responsible. So maybe we should have more of a joint accountability framework. And what's most important is users consider users as the most accountable, but that user was not directed toward themselves, but to others. So we should really maybe teach through education and through different campaigns. We should have personal accountability in the information that we consume and share. So I want to wrap up my talk by kind of summarizing what I wanted to say today. So one is that the news media landscape is changing a lot. And when we have a lot of ways that we could make news reading really amazing, when it comes to fake news, low-income countries were hit more severely than high-income countries in terms of fake news. And it's a global problem because when some problem doesn't stop in one place in the world, it's going to come back and recirculate. So it's not their problem, but it is also our problem. And some information has direct implication to vaccine hesitancy, and that could be used to prioritize which information to fact check first. And a lot of things should be collaborative. So we should, when something happens, we should try to learn get the insights from the early countries or the early people who suffer from there first, and try to use that insight as quickly as possible to stop any or mitigate any harm that could spread in, to any spread further. And what's really exciting for me is now governments, institutions are looking into social listening. People's voices have become really important. And there's growing anti-vax communities that we should look out. And when it comes to accountability, joint accountability could be considered, and personal accountability should also be emphasized. So let me wrap up my talk here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mia, again for this great talk, a very interesting research. Let's have a few minutes of question before we break. So if you have a question in the audience, please come up to the mics. There are 3 mics placed in the aisles. So while people are coming up for the questions, we have 2 questions we have a few, I think, questions on the virtual platform, which our virtual chair is going to. Oh, but okay, go ahead first, and then we'll sort of switch back and forth between the on-site speaker participants, and yeah, go ahead. And please say your name before you ask your question.
All right. My name is Rino Nugroho. I'm from Indonesia, Universitas 11 Maret. So currently I'm still working on the same areas, on the misinformation and disinformation. I'm trying to compare my country with Taiwan, and your insight give me more understanding about the context. Some findings that I can highlight is the different strategies of government. Let's say in Taiwan, they tend to have humor over rumor strategies. So they put humor in every rumor. So they can fight the infodemics in terms of the COVID-19 misinformation quite well. But in my countries, the strategies is quite different. So we tend to have the government approach, which have strict regulation towards those who are responsible for spreading the misinformation. But that come another questions. If you say that to handle the infodemics, we need to have the joint action, right? Mm-hmm. But the question is, how can we still preserve the quality of democracy, preserve the quality of freedom of speech whenever, if we take the action, like the government action towards limiting the misinformation and disinformation. Mm-hmm. So I need your response about this. How to juggle between the limiting democracy and fight the misinformation at the other side. Thank you.
Okay, that's a really important question, and I also heard that also in Vietnam initially there were more people prosecuted for spreading misinformation than the number of confirmed patients. So at some point it was, more people were having trouble because they share misinformation than the virus itself. And should information be blocked, or should there be strong punishment? But at the same time, we don't know which information is true or false. So I think that's a great question. I don't have the answer for that. And about the humor as well, is using humor like a good strategy or not? When it comes to, when I attend the WHO workshops on how different countries confronted COVID-19 misinformation, some different countries really adopted different strategies, just like you said. And when it comes to reaching the locals, one person said it was really important if it's a religious country, it's really important to reach out to the religious leader in their community and have that person talk about COVID-19 rather than like a government, official, like a doctor come out on TV and say something. It was the religious leaders whose voice was more touching and the locals were more listening to that. But maybe that doesn't work in Korea. So I think I do not think there's any silver bullet, and I think it should also be like a lot myriads of different strategies that we should take. But we should also worry about not bombarding people with too much information and restrictions. So there should be a balance. I don't have the answer for you, but yeah.
Yep. So I got the one question that got the highest vote online. So do you think shadow banning would have similar effect to the fact checking messages on the tweets, or could it be more dangerous? Shadow banning, stopping the spread of a news without the user knowing.
Whether that would be effective.
Yeah, will be effective or could be more dangerous.
Could be more dangerous. Yes. So yes. So we don't want the information moderation, right? So just like the very last study showed, the most memorable. So even if you fact check, if people somehow can't remember because there are so many things going on, it may not be effective. And the study says fact checking immediately after showing the rumor will be effective, but not before showing, right? And then I think my personal take is that there are certain misinformation that could wait to be fact checked. For example, gargling may not, kill the virus. It's okay if one gargles or if one takes more lemonade or anything. It's okay, but there might be some misinformation, like holding your breath for 10 seconds, and then if you can do that, you're not confirmed. Then you're gonna start going out to the public because you think you're not confirmed. So maybe some rumors might benefit by just inoculating, preemptively inoculating, but many rumors which are funny and could be there, right? Could be just give us some laughs, and they could be maybe fact checked later on, or some of them might not need to be fact checked at all.
Okay, so sorry. There's a question on that side. Please go ahead.
Thanks. I've got Michael. Oh, does this work? Yeah, Michael Veal from UCL. I've got a couple of points. One of them, you discussed sentiment analysis in your talk. There's been a lot of criticism around actually trying to infer emotions, particularly as you were discussing in a more longitudinal way. I was wondering if you'd reflected on that in your work and how. And secondly, there's platforms. People now operate across many different platforms, across many different communication modalities in many countries. Private groups and so on, and sharing groups, WhatsApp groups, forwarding, and so on is very important. And in other communities, physical interactions may be very important and interact. In work we've done around elections and cybersecurity, you find in places like small island states, not only do platforms never pick up the phone to even address these issues, but you have many different connecting modalities. I was wondering if these contributed to your findings, or how they might challenge some of the findings you had methodologically, but also substantively.
Okay,
thanks.
That's a great question. So we got the IRB approved, and I think just like any other study, we try to look at the group's characteristics and only use the publicly available tweets, not like personally shown, and remove some items like including like add hashtag directed to someone mentions like that. So I think what we did was to just look at the data, just like any other study that IRB could approve, and not monitoring individuals and tracking them down, but looking at the group, like the positive group versus the negative group. So we look at that level. And when it comes to offline, people who are offline and that cannot be reachable, there's also a lot of workshops dedicated at WHO that are trying to see what are the strategies that might try to reach these people. And that religious leader was one solution that was shared in the workshop, to reach individuals who are not necessarily online or not even picking up the phone and so on. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just take one more question from the online.
Yep. So regarding the UNICEF component, do you know how UNICEF decides what is important, not important to respond to?
Oh, that's a great question. I do not know, but I'm just assuming that because they have like maybe every 2-3 weeks the reports are published. There's a time that they collect these information, so collect all the misinformation during the time to the next report, and there's a time like 2 weeks time that the individuals can maybe discuss, like determine what is critical and what is not. I do not know what would be the process for that, but I assume not just computer scientists, but a lot of virologists and a lot of people would be involved in deciding that. It's a great question. But the guideline was given so that other people in other countries could also use it as a guideline. So maybe different countries have different set of rumors, but if you read these reports, it gives you a sense like, okay, what kind of information is critical and why and how we can address them. So they give you steps to address as well.
Okay, there are some more questions, but we're out of time. So let's thank the speaker again. Thank you. And so we have a break now, but please do come back. We have an excellent panel coming up at 9:30. So take your break and come back.